Hi, everyone, and welcome to this video, to this conversation that we are going to have. And this is part of a series that we are starting where we want to basically, have conversations on different educational issues. We are all part of Aaina. And for those of you who are joining on YouTube and who may not have checked our Instagram page, uh, what we do primarily is to, create visual stories and different kinds of content to reflect on educational experience, educational inequality, and and to invite reflections on particular issues. So today we are going to take up one of our posts, one of the stories that we have done, and we'll sort of have a conversation amongst ourselves and hope to kind of invite you into thinking about this issue a lot more. We'll get into that in like a minute, but before that, just wanted to introduce all the faces you see. So there's Shruti, Nidhi, Vrinda, and Sakshi. And we hope it's going to be a fun conversation. And it's the first time we're doing it. So looking forward and excited. So just to give a little context for the theme. So what we do in Aina is, we try to sort of take up an issue or experience that we are all experiencing, but we are not necessarily analyzing it a lot, right? So one of those things is us, this relationship between seniors and juniors in college. Uh, and we think that there's a lot going on in that. And there's a post we did on it. So we are going to be talking about that and thinking about that. And we'll also go into like what went into building this post, because there's a lot of thought and conversation and reading that goes into it. So we also want to talk a little bit about that. So maybe we can share the screen and start. Okay, so this is the first kind of slide of the story. And it's setting up a context that each academic year, a new batch of students enters campus. Existing students find themselves in the role of being a senior. And then we're asking the question, but what are some problems with how they imagine and practice this role? So I thought maybe we can like start with this sort of broad reflective question. And all of us have found ourselves in the role of being a senior. Um, So how did you experience that? What were your like thoughts, desires, identity, and so on? Shruti, would you like to go?
Yeah, I think my experience of being a senior was uh, really one of the characters that comes up later on in this post. Or like I can relate to at least two of the characters that come up later on the post. One is where you're trying to give advice to juniors who come to you for advice, but you find yourself not in a position of knowing enough stuff or knowing enough things to be able to give advice properly. So you're trying to say things like, well, this is what you could do, this is something else that you could do, but at the end, it's up to you. It kind of ends up being not super useful to them. And I think as I progressed into like the later years, like year 4 and year 5, I tended to like sort of lose this connection with juniors as well and was kind of a recluse, which in hindsight I shouldn't have been. But yeah, these are things that strike my mind right now, but maybe others have something more to say.
Nidhi, you also, I think, sort of came up with this post idea, if I remember correctly. So you could also tell us a little bit about that. Like, I mean, it's coming from some experience, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think for me it was basically that when we talk about education and educational spaces, the teacher-student relationship gets a lot of primacy. But to kind of open that up to what are the other relationships, that are shaping your experience in a particular institution, that are also orienting you to a particular institution, and then you kind of carry that forward in some ways. You also define how other people experience that space. I felt like it was worth kind of investigating, because um, there is the question of power there, but it's not, sometimes not very straightforward. Um, and the way it's experienced can also be, I think for me, being a senior is always like very tentative, very, I think similar to what Shruti was saying. I don't know how I come off or what the effect is. I think then you'll have to talk to juniors for that. But the way I experience it is definitely sometimes with a lot of dread. Um, there's a lack of ease with which, at least initially, I approach these relationships. So it can be quite overwhelming to have someone ask questions, and you want to give the best answer, or the most like sort of well-rounded answer that helps them navigate a particular space that maybe you've had already had some experience of. But also being wary of determining their experience too much, and that kind of stuff. Also, once you realize the full kind of personhood of your junior, it becomes more of a friendship. And then I become very like, yeah, I guess, I don't know, then it's also like a lot of admiration that I feel sometimes with specific people. And yeah, so yeah, it's very like sometimes very anxious and fraught to be in that position. There's a lot of like overthinking also, which is not helpful at all. Like that's, I think that's the question this raises also, right? What are some of the problems with which, I mean, how you practice that role can create certain experiences for other people. And uh, I always kind of aspire for more ease and clarity in these relationships, and also the openness to be able to hear if something's not working.
Uh, I also, I mean, it's pretty recent for me. So, like, it was like I was very aware of, I think, the dynamics as a junior. And like my first few like years in college, I kind of like spent a little bit confused about how there is every system is kind of enabling that hierarchy. Like, if you're in a student council or something like that, then there will be seniors in the student council and juniors in the student council, and they will appoint, like they will give the work or whatever. So there is like, even if you're not practicing some of those things, or if you're trying to stay away from some of those things, they kind of bleed in, and which is kind of very reflective of school and like college spaces being very hierarchical. And it was also kind of like, oh, we're trying to be democratic, but also not really, because it was like completely, contradictory to each other. So I think as a senior, I kind of just like took a backseat. I think I don't think I interacted too much with my juniors, but like just because there is a power dynamic between a senior and a junior, it does not mean like there is like an aloofness that is kind of required off of you. I think there should be more conversations about how to navigate some of those some of those power dynamics in everyday conversations as well. So yeah, Brinda.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about what all of you said. Like, I think I have been the aloof senior, but also it's like how I imagine myself as a senior originally was based out of spite at how my seniors were when I was in first year. And spite simply because they were the people who were responsible for a lot of gatekeeping or this unapproachable atmosphere that was present in campus. But that said, in this attempt to not be that or say be different as a batch, I remember that before the second years even came to campus, like while we are doing this prep for their orientation, while we're making handbooks, designing the mentor-mentee system, things along these lines. Like I remember within the first semester when juniors were in campus, I was already inching towards a burnout. Like it was a situation of okay, we have planned or thought about this so much. Now suddenly I don't know how to socially be like I ended up being this warm but eventually unavailable person. Like I ended up not talking to juniors in an individual capacity as much. What has been interesting is that it changed over time, like with institutions also, because I think I used to, through undergrad and through some part of masters also, imagine this as like some sort of, oh, okay, there is a way to be a good senior, right? But in PhD also, because uh, till then these were, again, as I think Nidhi also pointed out, these are very understated dynamics, right? These are things that are shaping culture as well as assumptions about culture, but people are not really talking about this as much as they're talking about teachers, for example, or as much as they're talking about student issues overall. I started PhD right after the pandemic, like during the pandemic, and when like I was in the first semester when colleges opened up right after. And there was this clear conversation on how there is, say, a weakening of a certain existing institutional culture that was passed down from seniors to juniors, or that was passed down across batches.
Mm.
So this cultural link was being made clear then, because you saw a pause in that, because while the academic stuff went on during the pandemic, extracurriculars, there were also attempts to continue that in some capacity or the other. It is these more social, informal relationships that faced a pause. And so it is interesting that through that also, because PhD is a much longer process, so you are there in the institution. And there was some spite there also. But now I can like think of it slightly less hierarchically. So I'm thinking of it as, okay, like a relationship between like people who have been there and people for just coming there, not as much as senior junior, and
Yeah.
that feels like a safer zone to exist in. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I also strongly relate to that. And I think I've had a similar evolution, if that's the right word, or a movement in how I think of myself as somebody who's been there in the institute, and not to kind of get attached to this sort of word like I'm a senior. But I've been here and I've had some experiences, and let's have a conversation with somebody who's just coming in, right? But but I think like in undergrad, I feel like, again, like I was not consciously thinking about it. And now that I look back at it, I think I sort of had a sense of who I am as a senior through certain situations. I felt like I was just part of without really thinking about what I wanted to do. So for example, when first years came in and I was in the second year, or was it I was in the third year, but I don't exactly remember. But I remember some of my batchmates, they were like, "Oh, the first years are here, first years are here. Let's talk to them." And we went to the canteen, and suddenly some first year came and were like, "Oh, come and sit with us." And then a couple of people like asked them to recognize which like city I'm from or something like that. And even I kind of then contributed to that moment, and I could sense that this first year was a little like was feeling awkward and nervous and perhaps a little intimidated. But we were all there and just having this moment. And then like she left after that. And we also moved on. And I was like, okay, that felt weird. That just felt weird and that felt wrong at some level. Um, but there was no reflection on it, right? And it seemed to me that a lot of my peers, they kind of assumed a sense of seniority by just like assuming like, okay, this is the ritual through which we interact. And in fact, we will be talking about this in one of the slides, I think. So that was one experience I had. And after that, like some of you said, I also was, I think, a little aloof. I didn't really think much. I mean, if I met some people from the first or second year, I would talk to them. Yeah, and sometimes they would seek me out. So similar personalities would get together, or there would be interest-based meetings. But I think it's only later in a different institute and when I was a PhD student that I felt this sense of a responsibility uh, towards just like, like breaking that sense of intimidation and distance and hierarchy, right, between, let's say, the PhD students and the master student. but again, there are some sort of reflections I want to have. Like, for example, are you forthcoming or are you tentative, right? Because, there is a sense of a distance, there is a sense of a hierarchy, even if you want to break it. And often it might feel a little uncomfortable too, right? A lot of my peers used to say that, oh, this PhD student just, I don't know, let's just give me some gyan or call me to the room and uh, said a bunch of things. And I don't know, it just felt uncomfortable. And maybe they want to be friends with me, but the way they're going about it just feels weird, right? So yeah, so that's something that I'm still reflecting on, that while I really believe that we have to challenge like age hierarchies and how they operate in education, but how to go about them, right, is something that needs a lot of thinking and reflection. Yeah. I think we
Shall
can
we
have a look
start?
at,
Okay, yes,
yeah.
the slides. Yes.
This is something that I have heard quite a bit. It's part of it is like claiming ownership over campus space, as this slide is saying, that somebody's just like, oh, these juniors are everywhere. Um, but often, like I've heard, like second year master students saying that the first year master students are just irritating. I'm like, on what basis are you saying this? I don't understand why sometimes that's like a default response people have. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that's interesting for me, again, I've also heard things like this, mainly because I feel like there's a frustration or discomfort or inability to tolerate where we are in our journey with the where the other person is in their journey with the institution, right? Or like where a certain batch is. So usually I've seen people being frustrated by how much energy people who are new to the institution have, or like how enthusiastic they are, etc., etc. um and perhaps, like, the senior batch is a little more settled in and exhausted, or kind of, yeah. And I feel like, yeah, like these are things that are natural to feel in certain ways, but the interesting thing for me is that they become these like ideologies of seniority, juniority that get passed on, right? Like, there are already these frames with which we think about the new batch, because the new batch, when they kind of graduate to the next year, are going to say the same things about the newer batch. So they're just these like repeated, like they're just these refrains that people keep um saying, and they become, I guess, ways to orient yourself in different transitions. I don't know, like, yeah, for me it was always, yeah, it was a bit strange because I would hear this being said when I was a junior, and then I tried very hard not to say it when I was a senior. um but it's also like what Shine was saying, right? Like, what is the other route through which you then relate to people? And I also, like, sort of as a result became a little aloof and like very confused and very mixed signals all over the place from me and stuff, because I didn't know how to deal with um you know एक तो my own social awkwardness in general, but also then what are new ways that you can use to relate to people who are new in the institution and position yourself. Yeah, I mean, so like it can be super messy to find that, because looking back, I feel like, yeah, there were moments where I had my own arrogance, or that, that I did really claim that, okay, I know this about this institution, whatever. Um, and then there were moments where I was like really trying to explain it more in the way that Vrinda said, like that it doesn't really mean that someone has more experience, quote unquote, versus less. Like, are there other frames that are more true in a way? Because, and I feel like, I don't know, there's something about higher education that maybe makes this more possible to do, because there's more of a trajectory behind everybody to kind of get to know. But it remains true, right? Like, even at the school level, you don't know really what the other person who may be younger than you has experienced. And what is really more experienced. So then, yeah, like this irritation with people from a different batch being in different spaces, occupying different spaces, is also about loss of a particular time in your own life in that institution. So
Mhm.
I want to quickly point out how even among seniors, it's maybe only a specific portion or specific group of these seniors who occupy these spaces, and there are others who have probably not been welcomed into these spaces early on into their college journeys, and just think that these spaces aren't for them, right? So I think it's important to mention that also.
yeah, that I was going to ask that actually, like in your experience, how have you seen this hierarchy interact with other hierarchies, um, caste, class, gender, ethnicity, everything that plays out in student interactions?
I mean, it does play out, right? I think, there are like whatever, I mean, in Delhi University, some of the college spaces, I mean, you knew that, okay, there were these sort of more popular hangout spots. And do you see everybody there? Probably not. Um, and and I feel like it depends on like who are occupying those spots and with what kind of uh an energy or or like uh like it may not be inviting, right? Often when you sort of pass those spaces, and so there are those power dynamics operating then, like okay, here are the spots where these are the people who are going to be there, and it's also about how you occupied that space, right? I mean, like, do you occupy that space with ease and confidence, or do you occupy that space feeling a little shriveled up and awkward? um yeah, so mm I feel like another thing that happens is also like, I mean, often like students' introduction to spaces is also kind of violent, like I feel like with the context of ragging um, and different kinds of, let's say, violence that happens in hostels and all of that, right? I think the way people are introduced to the space as a first year is also like, really, really problematic. I mean, like for example, in like the 1 year of engineering that I did, when I went, the first day I went to college, there was palpable like fear among all of the first years. I mean, of course, by the third day, you have normalized it and you find a way to dodge. But you know that as soon as you like kind of approach college premises, you're going to be caught and you're going to be ragged in different ways. So, yeah.
I think, like, I'm still thinking about this, like how the hierarchies intersect, the question you asked, Nidhi. But I'm also realizing that as seniors, or like as individuals who want to do something different in college, right? It was almost easier to think of agency as a senior because that's like starting anew than thinking of addressing, say, intra-batch hierarchies, right? So, say, doing something about how these very spaces that you think that juniors are hogging or something, that many of your own classmates don't feel as comfortable accessing them, simply in that they don't feel that deep a sense of belonging to the institution that they can chill and hang out for longer, right? Like that it is more of a come to campus, go back to class, or be in less visible spaces. And there was a kind of complicity that was present there for, say, some people I'm thinking about and myself also. But it felt like, oh, we'll address this for our juniors, like, oh, we want this to be a welcoming space for our juniors, but there's very little conversation, and I think a lot of, like, I mean, some shame, but a lot of awkwardness around how to address that within your own batch, especially class caste related hierarchies, right? So you would do that at an individual level, but say a department union would not be having a conversation about it. about those hierarchies, right? Or they would, if they do, it is then at a more macro, almost like structural, theoretical level, not as much at a day-to-day social level.
I really, picked up the point that you said about intra-batch hierarchies and how like there are very specific, public-facing kind of like I remember lawns being occupied by like the more confident kind of where you're okay with being spectated or like looked at kind of people. Like it's almost always a certain kind of aesthetic associated to people who are occupy certain places. And I think the anxiety then when new students come in and why it feels so invasive is because we are not sure about where they fit in or what their category is or what the place they're going to occupy is. So, and it's also like multiple people meeting new people. So it's like very like everyone's interacting with everyone and they seem more than they actually are. Like juniors seem more than they actually are because we're not in our heads, we kind of are used to the spaces that people occupy, but when juniors come in and they're like talking to each other, they're making these connections, we don't know. And later we kind of see like some of the juniors who like then align with you on certain like, maybe certain caste class backgrounds, kind of co-opt and like sit in those places with you or sit with you and interact with you. So then it kind of phases out. But like the initial anxiety is, I think, very much that like who is going to interact with us and what happens to our space or, where do all of these other people fit in? So it's, I think, that as well.
Shall we move to the next slide?
Offering help and advice, but neglecting juniors' perspectives. Have you been that junior who's
I
felt
think
like
this is so palpable in society contexts. Like I can only think of, instances where you're in like some society and then there are juniors and you're someone who's been through the process. You probably know like how the admin is with you. And then there's a junior who's like, I have all of these ideas. And you're like, I was once that junior who had all of these ideas and they were kind of shot down. And I think that's where I kind of felt like, okay, we really don't know how to talk to other people. Like we have no sense of how to talk to juniors because it's kind of the same patterns of what we experienced, and then we're just like no, and we're just like shutting down ideas, or we kind of like it's they don't know that the process is going to be tough, but I think there should be a way to kind of let them know okay, these will be the roadblocks, but like yeah, worth a try or something like that. And there's also a little bit of like, oh, we know better, or like we didn't get to execute our ideas when we were a junior, so now it's our time, which I think kind of like when you do that, then there's a little bit of propriety over certain roles and things like that. So I think that like neglecting juniors perspective, you feel it and then you kind of find yourself in roles again where you're like, you know, reenacting those things. But again, offering help and things like that, I think even these conversations, they kind of tonally put like seniors in a position where they're like, inherently more knowledgeable, or like whatever they're saying is something that like goes, or if you're a junior, everything that you've thought of has been thought before. So there's kind of that dynamic as well, which I don't think is always true. And I mean, it really limits a lot of conversations that we could be having.
Yeah, I feel like I've definitely been this senior also, as well as the junior, I'm sure. And I've been the senior. I've also been the senior who is really unsure and like seeking a lot of information from the junior before even saying anything. And like Shruti was saying, right, like give a lot of different courses of action, like almost like taking too much responsibility. I mean, that also kind of deprives the other person of agency in that moment, right? Just that trust is not built where you know that you can just say what you're feeling, and then that person will evaluate for themselves. So I feel like this is misguided, but that is also misguided. And I feel like being a little bit of a bumbling buffoon also is a way to retain a lot of power and magnify your own role in a very unhelpful way.
yeah,
Yeah. I feel like in both scenarios, you're just working off of what Sakshi was also saying, right? Like how I used to be. Um, and letting that really determine fully determine how you are behaving with your junior. Like that happens with me a lot, where I'm working off the assumption and the memory of myself. And as a result, I'm not seeing the person who's in front of me. Um, which I think a lot of these different ways of thinking about being a senior, where you're like, oh, I have also experienced this, so you should as well. It's about how you're imagining the other person, but also how you're imagining experiences in campuses in general. Like, is all experience in an institution just a pattern replaying itself, or do we have room to understand that the conditions are different and everything is like a specific attempt? Yeah.
No, but I also think that, I mean, there are some nuances here, right? Like, for example, this kind of a scenario, it's good that this person on the right is having a thought, which is kind of like annoyed, right? But often, like, there's a dynamic that's created between two kinds of people, right? You have a speaker, let's say, who loves hearing their own voice or who likes giving gyan, and you have a kind of a listener who, let's say, are not feeling a lot of agency in that moment, are more accepting. But that's not the only kind of dynamic that's there between senior and junior, right? I mean, there are also dynamics where, juniors are kind of responding or questioning or challenging. Uh, but, and of course, there's, as you said, like there are also seniors who may be more tentative or who just don't know what to say. Or, I mean, you said bumbling buffoon, which was quite interesting. But yeah, like there's also that. But I am, to be honest, I'm more comfortable with that, with the tentativeness, than with the assertiveness, because I feel like in university spaces, generally there is that like inequality or asymmetry of speaking, right, and of participation, and it's something we're constantly talking about in like Indian higher ed spaces. That, oh, like with diversity you also have this inequality. Some people are hogging the limelight, constantly talking over people. So how do you even, like as Sakshi was saying, how do you even learn to be in that like more equitable dynamic of speaking and listening? Um, right. And for that, I feel like for the senior to generally kind of be tentative and withdraw power and listen and encourage the junior to speak, I feel like, to me, feels like the a good starting point to set up a conversation with a junior. Yeah.
I think something that I find very interesting in the dialogue, right? Like what the senior is saying. That's something I think Nidhi and I were talking about while editing or trying to shorten the post. Oh, like what is it about this dialogue that makes the junior think that they can't respond, like that they can't clarify? Like what is the underlying thing in the dynamic, which I found interesting like while seeing this slide the first time also, because my first response, because I am usually very tentative and disclaimery, was that, oh, like like junior should be able to like clarify that, right? And also going back to the pattern, like finding a pattern always, or always assuming that there is a pattern. Going back to that thing, this, you kids are too relaxed. You should start reaching out at least 5 months in advance. This feels like a very like interesting addition, because if but this feels like it's like some years of assumptions in the background that are working and that are making her say this, you kids are too relaxed while apart. Where do we pick up this, what Nidhi called this culture or like ideologies of seniority from? That like there is this tendency to make comments about, or like generalization judgments
Mm.
about entire batches. So if it's asked, like even the question of how is this batch, how is the new batch, it's usually responded with like this confident assertion that, oh, like they're so much more active, or oh, they're not like as academically interested, whatever be the case. And it's always so interesting to me that like how is a batch anything as a unit anyway, right? Like how is the batch just a singular thing? So yeah, like that dynamic, how it just plays out in very casual corridor conversation, seems very
Mm.
interesting to me.
Now, I wonder how this ideology of seniority would be different, say in a PhD program where people are coming into the program at different points in their life, are probably, I mean, there's no like set age that a certain batch will be, broadly off. So I'm thinking about that.
No, I was actually thinking about the like in the first slide itself, and someone asked, right, like, how were you as a senior? I had this interesting moment literally like early this year where there was a junior I felt like whatever, I felt like I had a responsibility towards, and generally like because of shared disciplines, etc., we were having more conversations. And I think in my trying to be nice, approachable, warm, welcoming, etc., I also was tentative overall, but I realized, like, I think a few months or almost a year after knowing them, that they are 3 years or more than 3 years older to me and have done like multiple masters. And I just like remember feeling a shift. Like I remember when, like that exact moment and being like, oh, like have I been, have I at any point been patronizing or infantilizing? Of course, I was not that personally close that I could address it to them. But yeah, it was, yeah, a moment that did make me pause. And from the subsequent batches, I've not had the assumption that the person is like like the same age or younger. Like they can be older. And so I have to have some like age agnostic senior junior relationship, which is, yeah, still work in progress, I think.
Like this also makes me think of what position you occupy as a junior, like a kind of like I'm always questioning or I'm asking my seniors about I have these anxieties and I'm just like seeking whatever. So I mean, I don't know about the PhD situation and if like the same rules apply for a junior, but I think just as there's like a senior ideology, there might also be like a junior kind of position where you kind of like go in with okay, I can ask these questions and it's okay for me to ask these questions. Like some of the things that they were like a lot of my juniors asked me were things I never asked anybody. Like I was just like, okay, these were also questions and I didn't ask anybody. So I mean, and then I realized, okay, I have acquired knowledge of this, and like so there is always like a asking or like a inquiring kind of position that a junior kind of comes with. I don't know if like, which is why I also think that some of the senior ideology or like senior positions are very self-important because a junior is kind of seeking advice from multiple places, is kind of probably not taking you that seriously, is kind of just like, okay, this is random, one person said this, and like five other people I asked about what notes to use or what teacher is like what and how assignments are graded. So they're kind of like collating information. It's also a way of making sense of this new place that you're in, right? And that's for any place. Like, I mean, regardless of age, you kind of adopt that, like, oh, I'm new here. Can I know more? And like sometimes these networks are important to pass like important information, like, oh, that's a creepy senior. Don't go near that guy, or like, just like generally, like it can also be like a gossip kind of thing where it's helpful to a junior in the sense that they're able to like avoid things or find their comfort zone.
But talking about the creepy senior, should we go to the next slide? Because I think we have a creepy senior.
What a bizarre segue.
So I have, I mean, this slide is saying carrying for. I mean, it's something that I think we have been talking about through this conversation, and he's saying, "Hey, freshies, first task: give an intro with your entrance exam rank and coaching institute. You can't use your names." All these sort of inherited rituals, right? But in the next slide, uh, I think there's something else happening, right? Where you have like a senior who's really trying to, I don't know, who believes that this is how you induct juniors, right? And what is the agenda really? And what's one thing I'm always curious about is that, like, while there's a narrative that builds on, okay, this is the creepy senior. Often, like, I feel like that conversation is not being had with that senior, like by, let's say, his immediate friends who may also be aware, right? And I'm not saying that they're necessarily defending this person, They're also aware, but they are kind of living this dual life where, they are, let's say, the better seniors who are talking to juniors and trying to even like explain to them, maybe he's a little like that. Don't take him seriously. But also not pointing it out, right? And I feel like one way in which you bust senior ideology and all these sort of problematic rituals, or all these things that seniors want to do, is if like your batchmates have a conversation together, and there's also like a lack of that.
Yeah, and I remember this is something we kind of deliberately introduced also, right? Like this third person, if you think about it narrative wise, he doesn't really need to be there as far as storytelling goes, but um the idea is to have someone who at least appears to be the same age as him, um you know kind of recognize that something is off here, and model the kind of resistance. I mean, he's not really talking to him yet, but I mean, our hope is that he would. So yeah.
But tell me something, like, what is your opinion on this whole, like, okay, the juniors being a dating pool kind of, you know, thought process, which is actually quite real, right? Like, and I'm sure these are like gendered conversations, very different in different spaces, but you are kind of whatever thinking of, oh, these are the juniors I want to hang out with. They're the cool people. Um, and you know that you can ask them out for a date with a sense of entitlement almost, right? Because you're a senior, right? And in fact, like this also becomes slightly weird, like in the hostel I was staying in. So there was a dorm that was created near this hostel where a lot of women students started like staying. So they would now come and have dinner at the hostel. And suddenly, like the whole, I don't know, like economy of desire shifted, and the way the people were talking just completely changed. So in the so ev- so every day, right, there would be like these sort of groups of boys who would be all like plotting, like, oh, like, okay, which girl to like talk to, and who to talk up. And if, let's say, one guy was talking to one girl and they're like walking out together, then others would be piche say, they would be like, acha, today you're going, right? And in fact, in the hostel, there was some like event organized to welcome the dorm people, and people were given prizes for that. And I remember like it was a very polarized response, because there were a bunch of like women who were just like, okay, something is going on, maybe I should participate. And there are others who are just like, this is so creepy and uncomfortable. I don't know if there was a best. Yeah, there was like, what do you call, like best freshers, some stuff like that
There's
they were doing.
Mr. Freshers and Miss Freshers.
Yeah, Mrs.
Yes.
Fresher. Yeah, they were doing
Mrs.
that stuff.
Fresher is happening. What is happening?
No, not Mrs. Sorry. But yeah, like, but no, I just want to know, like, how do you think about this, or what do you think about this?
I kind of, I mean, age gaps in relationships, that's like a other conversation as well. But I think that age and a senior are two distinct categories. Like even though they're informed by each other, if you're a senior, there is an obvious kind of thing. Like, yeah, there might be like a whole like very obvious new dating batch coming in, like a new batch for whatever. But I think it's also very subtle. Like in one moment you will be in like some shared space together where the hierarchy is reinforced, like, oh, you're calling me a kid again, like, and at the same time it's like, oh, these are also the same people who are like dating outside of these spaces. So the contradiction of that is kind of very like, it was very visible to me. Like, and kind of like a lot of people participate in it. It doesn't have to be so obvious. Like eventually, if you're sharing some spaces, people will be in relationships. People will have friendships that are new. But like, this kind of like the senior being an additional kind of category of power over age is also like a thing in within college spaces. So I think new batch and like within college kind of it definitely was a thing. Like it definitely was like a there was kind of some interest, I would say.
And this hierarchy is all the more pronounced when juniors are just coming in, they don't know nothing about the institution, and seniors are also probably just stepping into these new roles where they feel like they should have the power that their seniors had, and they're excited to maybe fill in these new shoes. So I think on both ends, like, it is amplified. The feeling of not knowing anything is amplified for like the freshers batch, for instance, and for seniors who are just stepping into their roles as seniors, maybe is also amplified, which I think contributes to this sense of entitlement on the part of the senior, and also to the sense of, okay, I'll go along with it, because if I say no to this, then maybe I'm just here, I don't want to burn bridges or anything like that. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good way to put it, because from what I have seen, it's what Shayan, the incidents you recounted also, right? Like for a lot of people, it is this fun bonding, like
Yeah.
cute way to like experience new friendships, new relationships, newness in the spaces that you occupy. Um, and it can be that, and it has been that for a lot of people around me also. But it's that thing of like just entering, and the default kind of the first approach to an entire batch being one of this entitlement and one of this like securing a partner kind of thing, which also I have seen happen. That is what feels a little uh like something to have more conversations about. And I remember that like during the conversations around Me Too, also this came up a lot of like, what does a male senior, also particularly like dominant, English speaking, suave, and also kind of thinks of, has this charm with juniors and thinks of them in this way. I remember that being discussed a lot as something that became unpleasant for many people also.
But I want to problematize this just a little bit, because I feel like another thing I've seen is sometimes where there is this sort of class caste uh, dynamic operating in who is sort of considered uncomfortable also, right? And like I've seen this, like, I mean, from both ends, right? I mean, there are, let's say, guys who have said something like, oh, like these urban women, they will never like look at us. And, there's that kind of a sentiment. And then there are people, and this actually became an issue. This became a conversation in like a center. Uh, and where like some people try to explain this guy's behavior, saying that, oh, but this is just how he is. It's a cultural thing, right? So, and if let's say you are saying that this is problematic, you are being classist in some way. That kind of an argument was also made, right? And there were others, but who were like, no. But the reality is that there are also biases that operate in terms of who we find comfortable or uncomfortable. And it's just like something to think about.
Yeah, I think across all these different slides in this post, definitely the need to think about intersecting hierarchies while we focus on senior junior relationships in this conversation, of course. But I think the caste class hierarchies and how they intersect with this sort of age slash separately senior junior kind of hierarchy obviously comes up at every stage.
Yeah, and like I think Sakshi said that, like thinking of senior as a separate category of power from age, right? I think like male senior in some ways unequivocally has to also be thought of as a separate category while thinking of
Mm.
intersections, of course. But I'm also
Yeah.
talking from experience of all women's college, right? Where, of course, people are dating across batches still, but this, like, the sexual power dynamic doesn't exist as much. So you don't have a predatory gaze over the incoming batch, for example. And that was a very uncomfortable shift for many people who moved from all women's colleges in undergrad to like co-educational spaces for masters, because there is suddenly this new gaze you have to accustom yourself to almost. And I have had that like almost like funnily like uh, the classist thing, a friend who found someone like who was me like who felt uncomfortable because of someone. I had to have the conversation with her that okay, this is also like a separate bias operating, right? And this was about like way of talking. But at the same time, it's just like I think that feels like an easier conversation to have individually with both the people. But this broader culture of the predatory gaze, or that oh like इनसे ऐसे बात करनी है, or like this sniggering that happens among senior boys sometimes, right? That feels very hard to like yeah penetrate into in any way. Yeah.
I kind of also am thinking about what kind of senior gets called out very often. Like it's not the senior who is kind of like, perhaps practicing similar, violation of space or other things, but is kind of presenting very like fits aesthetics that seem very charming or, very acceptable, palatable to someone. So I kind of like, I'm also thinking of the senior with like painted nails, little liberal, kind of talking in spaces like, oh yeah, we should all be like very like, I'm a feminist kind of, I read all of these books, and that senior might also be practicing some of those things, but is rarely called out or is ever discussed in circles like, oh, that's a creepy senior. Like that kind of gets like hidden in other kind of, power politics as well. And generally, then there is like a dishonesty about like relationships. Like every relationship could have a power dynamic, but it's like important to address it very openly and like be very honest about it. So those kind of get blurred in such scenarios. So I was also thinking of like who gets let off the hook and like who is usually like pinpointed as the, villain in some of these situations.
Being indifferent or cynical about issues brought up by juniors, preventing solidarity. So, I have mixed opinions about this. Like, I agree that this is sort of a reality, right? Where, like there are seniors who are cynical, but I think have also experienced it from the other end, where, let's say seniors are really trying to, I don't know, like establish solidarity, and juniors seem indifferent, or yeah, they don't feel invited into like maybe a political conversation. I think another thing that happens is that like just like solidarity in terms of class or grade level sort of issues, right? So in the first year, okay, there's some issue that you come together as a class, and there, okay, are the other sort of batches also coming together with you, and it could be something as small as even, I don't know, assignment or how a teacher is behaving or whatever. Um, so there it may be a little more complicated. But I think if you're thinking of like political solidarity, I feel like, yeah, that it's like both of these scenarios happen. Like what we are showing in the slide happens, but then, yeah, it's also sometimes like seniors are really frustrated with how juniors are not showing solidarity.
Yeah. I may have been the senior. um, but yeah, again, I've mixed feelings, and I do think that it happens on both sides as well. It may also so happen that it might be the newer batches who may not have been as affected by the uh, yeah, by the institution or the changing policies within the institution, uh, or might not feel it because they haven't been there long enough. I don't know. Yeah, and so don't have a personal stake in it. I think it happens on both ends.
I've had a very different experience with this. In undergrad, I got progressively more and more exhausted, both by the physical space of the institution, but also how administration was reacting to certain things. I was also, I think, and this is like ongoing, reckoning with what role I can play and, how to sort of build together. But I feel like meeting juniors who were very solid, able to be very persistent with demands, found new ways to bring people together, energized me a lot. And then I started sort of learning so much more about how to sustain, efforts, how to get things done, how to stay active, keep sort of listening and trying to do stuff, trying to change things. From them. So I feel like it had a very energizing effect on me, meeting juniors who were also very interested to do things. In masters, it was very difficult to, first of all, understand what was going on. I was in the pandemic batch. So like I feel like I kind of gave up on trying to make sense of what was happening and kind of receded into my own, like, okay, I'm going to take care of myself and do this master's thing on the side, sort of thing. But it was definitely harder to make sense of everybody's, to even like understand, get to know what everybody's priorities were and how they perhaps clashed with each other, because we also lacked that sort of campus space and that common ground, I guess, physical space to work off of. So that made it very complicated. But yeah, I feel like overall it has also had this energizing effect on me, where then I kind of get out of my head and find new ways to be useful. Yeah.
That's actually very like that's a nice way to put it, because I have also, I think, at least in PhD, I have just been motivated by the, say, sometimes is the interest that uh, juniors would show, that like just by the virtue of having been in an institute for 4 5 years or more, that like people my batch or older, like older batches won't show. So I wanted to ask though, Shayan, you mentioned like the mixed feelings and that seniors trying to push for something, but juniors not being very responsive or engaged. What is the type, as in what is the reason, or what do you think is behind that? Like here we know it's like jadedness, disillusionment, cynicism. Sometimes it's like life coming in the way because you are thinking about career more and more when you're closer to the end of a degree. But in the reverse case, what do you think is behind that feeling?
I think there
And
are
also,
different reasons.
sorry, just
Uh-huh.
tagging on to that question, and how did you also reckon with this feeling of like no
Yeah.
one's responding? Yeah.
So I don't I haven't felt that. I've heard this feeling, and I've had a critical distance from that. Uh, because okay, there are many reasons why people may feel that. I mean, it's about the kinds of discourses they've been introduced to, the kind of spaces they're coming from. So their immediate context and histories play a role in how they're going to feel in a new sort of university space, right? um, and also, like, sometimes the ways in which seniors are trying to invite them in may not be the most inviting for everybody. So then it's also a question of strategy. It's also a question of what kinds of conversations. And of it, like, I feel there are seniors who give up hope and articulate that, right? And I feel like you get trapped in that dynamic, right? Where, like, as a junior, you're just like, okay, the senior thinks I don't give a shit. So I don't, like, so there are also seniors who are articulating that sort of hopelessness, saying that you people, you don't do anything. You should do more. But I feel like times change, contexts change, and I feel like it's important for seniors, or for whatever, such kind of seniors who are, let's say, more politically motivated and want to develop sort of, yeah, want to initiate people. You have to think of different forms with which to do it, and it can't just be an issue based, right? I feel like it also has to be relationship. I mean, there also have to be relationships that are built, right? I mean, if people care enough about a cause, they'll turn up for it. uh but like, you're trying to initiate somebody into thinking about that, and in a situation where they haven't thought about a cause, right? And for that, like, you need like patience, you need conversations, and so on and so forth.
I think it's also to do with how the department or the institution and internal policies change as well over time. Like for instance, in my department, it was earlier on was it was quite a small program, and people knew each other, and there was more leeway to just bring up issues because you nurtured these relationships with people on a personal basis, just owing to the fact that it was a small, sort of not so institutionalized program and department and things like that. But as time goes on, and then there are rules put in place, and then there's like you can only work within these little uh, categories that you have, and it's a bit more difficult to um, even imagine ways in which you can ask for something to be changed. So I think it also depends on like the culture, internal policies, who's in leadership and things like that. That might, and seniors might have seen a different version of the same department or institution where they had more opportunities to bring up these issues, whereas juniors may not have that, just owing to how the institution works.
uh, so the question I had is, how do you, like, what, or how do you become a senior, or what do you have to do as a senior to, I don't know, offer more hope, or offer, solidarity, not be defeated? Uh, like, what do you think, like, in senior ideology, like, what is needed to make that happen?
I'm thinking of how we can not have the senior label at all. Like, how can we imagine being, a few years longer in the same institution or in the same educational space, but not have to assume this role of senior at all? How else would we, refer to somebody who's, um, yeah, 2 years ahead of you in the same program or things like that?
I don't know. Because I also find being in a batch comforting. Like I felt a real big shock after I graduated because there was nobody else who was experiencing the same kinds of stuff. Like, the first month of going to work. Like there was nobody else who was having the first month of going to work in my workplace in this, in somewhat relatable ways. So I really missed that, and I feel like it can be helpful. So I am trying to think of also maybe like openness, because I also don't know if it's like entirely on the senior. uh Seniors are, I mean, we're also human in our seniority. So
Hmm.
for me, what's been helpful is to be open enough to be energized by new things happening. And uh
I'm also thinking back to something that, like what Shruti and Shayan both said in response, like this, like not being too bracketed only as a senior, and like largely also say thinking of it as a new relationships with new people, and which will inevitably happen, right? It's not like those relationships are not happening, like uh so it's, I think so, like I think Shayan mentioned, to have, like say, constant building of a relationship instead of just say having conversations around an issue and expecting that to yield results. Thinking of it as, okay, like within those constant relationships which we have with like multiple participants, right? Multiple like batchmates, teachers, workers, everyone in the university, to have like reflection as a practice. That's an Aina plug, but yes, to have reflection as a practice constantly, so which even makes you more alert to these things, right? Like how conditions in which other people are entering the institution are different, which is constantly the case, right? Because syllabus is changing, timetables are changing, entrance exams are changing, timelines are changing. So just this constant like alertness to that, I think can also bring a kind of openness that you also mentioned, Nidhi, that being open enough to also understand the different material conditions they're coming from and how that would like affect the dynamic you are anyway supposed to happen. Yeah, like not a very coherent answer, but I think just thinking of it as like a building relationship helps. Yeah.
I mean, adding to that, I think the category of senior becomes very important because we value these positions within a college. So I think if as a student you're kind of thinking, or just like generally as a person, you're kind of thinking outside the college, that is helpful. Because then like you are thinking about the context of everything, then you're thinking about these small things like, okay, this is happening at like a large. So some of these problems become rooted in more like deep conversations, more deep like context, so you're able to kind of understand that okay, this is something that will require my continued effort, like it's something that I will be required to show up for my juniors, I will be required to kind of be there. So I think outwardliness, like kind of thinking about outside the college is very important, and like even at a junior stage kind of assuming less importance. And I think that's why seniors kind of also get like disillusioned, because it's like the college is so important and this particular issue is not getting like sorted within the college, so now it's over. But it's also like a thing that is going to be in your life, right? So it's like a microcosm of something that's going to be in your life. So just like recognizing the importance of that and being open to like generally, that is I think something a senior or like a can help like deprioritize the senior category a little bit.
Yeah. Nidhi, you have to drop off, so bye.
Bye.
Sakshi, there's something you said which I actually find very important, that to think of the outside, right? And I feel like when we are trying to analyze the senior junior relationship, or what does it mean to be a senior or junior, and senior ideology and so on and so forth, I mean, like it is a product of, or it is in a relation with many other ideologies out there. And I feel like to kind of really analyze who am I as a senior, what do I do, I have to analyze like what are the ways in which I live in this world, what kind of a family am I part of, what are the hierarchies there, what is my class position, how do I talk to people who I think are like below me or above me, right? And what have been my experiences of speaking? Do I speak over, or am I spoken over? You know, so all of those things are shaping, right? Uh, and I feel like at an individual level, at least, I feel like that kind of a reflection is really productive. Okay, how the senior or seniority is shaped by multiple social ideologies, but also there is that institutional ideology and replication, right, through rituals and practices. But that is also like correlating with a larger kind of social ideology. And just like something I remembered, this was like a orientation that some of us seniors had done for juniors. This is when I was in PhD, and this was for the master's batch. And we had created this song and dance routine. So it was like, okay, there's some people who came wearing like the junior placard, and some people came wearing senior placard. So so the junior walked in, and it was like entirely in song. So the junior walks in, and I remember just like the opening bit, which went like something like "Show me the meaning of being a junior," and we were just using like popular songs and trying to replay. And the ending, the final sequence was all of us like whatever tearing off our placards and breaking into dance, which was quite. I mean, I feel like it had an impact, but but at the same time, it is difficult to completely let go. But but yeah, like I am really drawn to the idea that Vrinda, you said, and Shruti, you also reinforced, of like, can we do away with this term? And yeah, and then think of like our relationships differently.
One
Please.
one
I know.
question I had though, but I guess Nidhi is not here. But Vrinda, you also worked on this. What dilemmas did we have as we were trying to like finalize the slides? Uh,
Yeah, like Nidhi would definitely be a better person to answer, but like, some that I can think of the top of my head are to show the senior also in like a more well-rounded way.
Mm,
Because like I think we made a conscious decision to not show only the creepy senior or the
yeah.
problematic senior, right? So to show the well-meaning senior and actually show the like not conscious struggle with the role, but just like this assumption of a role that you find yourself in suddenly and how you navigate that. So I think that was an important call. There were also things that we were struggling with that were let go of, and I don't recall exactly what it was, but there was a part we were thinking that can be explored separately in a post because it felt like there should be the scope for a junior to respond. So
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
that like basically we couldn't show the dynamic, we could show thoughts and we could show like common comments made and had to rely a lot on the narration. But
Yeah.
this like how it changes over time or how it develops also, I think we couldn't show as much of that. Yeah, and the other thing was that I remember we really struggled with like lack of literature on this, right? So it had to be
Yeah.
largely a conversation back and forth, developing the frame post because just nothing is written on it. And for another post also, I'm thinking of looking up age hierarchies between teachers students, not even like students, and that's also very hard to like come by. Like yeah, there's very little on that academically or even journalistically. Yeah,
And also even the labels like senior, junior are pretty like
yeah,
not across the world so that you would find it
yeah,
literature. There's no like
yeah,
analogous sort of
hmm,
relationship that might
yeah,
play out in maybe other regions of the
yeah,
world, other
yeah,
educational spaces. So I
yeah,
think
and other organizational spaces also, right? Like it's like either the designation based hierarchies or
yeah.
like yeah like in within colleagues the hierarchies that exist because of age or experience there are very few words for it, so good that we thought of doing away with the word senior also.
I think that in addition to what Vrinda wanted to say about we didn't want to throw the senior under the bus, I also remember we didn't want to just portray like what interactions happen between seniors and juniors, but we also really wanted to focus on how the seniors imagine themselves in this role of a
Yeah,
senior, which was really the premise that we wanted to like preserve in these multiple iterations of the post. Yeah.
I was also thinking of the conversation about what extent we can show like ragging and thinking about what position this person is in, because there are different contexts in which like seniors can have like a more violent or extreme position with juniors, which we didn't like end up like taking to kind of remain more open to different contexts so that at least the dynamic could be picked up from a general conversation about ragging. But yeah, I mean, this was also an idea of like who is the like the senior, where is the senior coming from, where are they positioned. So because like engineering and medical colleges have very like extreme cases of ragging as well, which kind of like were not in the post as well.
It was really lovely listening to everybody.
yes.